Hi, I'm Somer Hackley,
And I am Zen Mac, and this is the Art of Search Hiring Manager series.
and these are stories and insights about all things hiring. Well, good to see you, Zen, as always.
Hello, I love being here.
I know. Okay, question.
Okay.
Okay, what I love about talking to you is you've been in so many different environments. You've been internal, you've been external in terms of recruiting, you've been embedded, you've been at big tech companies, you've been at startups, you've seen lots of cool things. So let's talk about metrics. I'm curious.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because you have such great perspective. So like when you hear recruiting metrics, like what do you hear? What themes? How are people, you know, deciding that a search is going well? What have you seen out there?
Ooh, okay. That's a really good one, the big M. What's interesting, and one of the first insights is that when you think about recruiting measures, when we talk about it, it's always kind of starts with, is the job filled? Because if the job's filled with a fantastic hire, metrics is almost kind of sometimes not talked about and almost not cared about. But if you're running a recruiting department, then it's about productivity of the organization. It's about what the recruiting team is doing. It's about quality of the hire. It's about time spent in recruiting versus time spent in the panel interviews and all that stuff, right? So I kind of break down to a couple pieces. One of the very first metrics that most organizations look at is kind of top of funnel to hire. So that's everything from outreach numbers, maybe all the way to recruiting conversations, to hiring manager phone conversations, to panel interviews, to number of offers made, to number of offers accepted. And every kind of segment of those tells you a little bit of a different story, right? So number of panel interviews throughput to a hire. So if let's say your team has four people that do panel interviews for candidates and one makes a hire, you could easily say, well, that's a 4-to-1 ratio. That also says you're likely interviewing some of the right people because for every four, you're going to hire one. And then we have to kind of break down what the hire looks like. Is it number of offers made or is it number of offers accepted? Because that also tells you a different story. If it's four offers made and one accepted, that actually meant four of the people in the panel were spot on, but only one of them you were able to land. So maybe that's a comp strategy. Maybe it's a attraction strategy. Maybe that tells you something else. So then as you kind of go further up the chain, oftentimes I hear this idea around throughput from recruiting conversations to hiring manager screens because that then becomes the metric by which you're deciding how's the recruiting team doing, right? What are we finding the right kinds of people? And so somehow that number sometimes magically appears to be, you know, 12-to-1, 12 recruiting calls to 8-9 hiring manager calls to 3-4 panelists to one hire. And so that kind of gets that number of 12-to-1 and everyone just kind of takes off. What I found was really interesting is that once you've kind of solidified this golden number, golden ratio, 12-to-1, it's almost like applied like a stencil. Okay, so every time we have an open position, then, the number to hit is 12, right? And so if you have 10 roles, that's 120. So if you talk to 120 people and put them through the really curated and well dialed in process and keep really good metrics, it's likely that you'll fill all 10 jobs. But we also know that's not quite how recruiting works and different levels and different roles within organizations. How dialed in is the recruiting team? How dialed in is the interview panel? What are people on vacation? Like there's so many moving parts that I think it's kind of interesting when we apply this 12-to-1 ratio, it becomes that just hit 12, just hit 12, just hit 12. And I would actually challenge us a little bit in recruiting to say, could we get 12 to 9, 12 to 6? I know and I get that there might be a need to sample the market. There might be a need to calibrate. There might be a need to just have enough of a cross section of what the market actually is to make that decision. But my argument is if we can go from, say, 12 to 9, that's 25% savings on productivity. That's 25% of less interviewing the team's doing, 25% less of the time that you're going to have to coordinate and work through some of those pieces when we know out of those 12, you're really, really going to land one. So that's just an insight that came up. Sorry, I kind of went on a rant.
Well, you're passionate about it. So yeah, no, I have so many follow-up questions, but I'll try to streamline that. And I guess even, for our listeners, like to even get to the 12, I would venture to guess you're not just reaching out to 12 people
Right.
and and those are the magic ones, right? So
Yes.
there's a whole other set of metrics around, whether you're posting ads or doing outbound outreach and, the rate
Yeah.
at which people reply to your messages and all
Yep.
of that. So we're talking about even like past that part of the process,
Yeah.
truly filling the
Yeah.
funnel because there's a whole other set of metrics there too. But I love what you said, and I think that um, there's got to be a sweet spot though, because someone's not going to interview one person and make an offer, or at least they're not going to do that repeatedly, like maybe once in a blue moon. So, like,
Yes.
what is the number then if it's not 12, or why would it be six? And but let's talk about like what I'd like to know is how do you do that? How do you get the number of interviews to offers lower? Like how would you say you do that effectively? Like how can people make sure they have better ratios?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question, isn't it? Because we're talking about saving time and productivity. We're
Yeah,
talking about saving energy. We're talking about lower burnout rates, right? All of those types of things, and also the candidates, really.
yeah,
If you're looking for a job, right? Are you one of the 11 that isn't going to get chosen? And how
right.
many times do you really have that kind of energy for? I kind of go back to this idea of like how do we start the search? Like what do we set out to look for, and how far are we deviated from that core as the interviews and calibrations kind of take off, right? I think some of that is attributed to learning, some of
Mm,
that's attributed to understanding the market. But I do think that if we can get that dialed in a little bit deeper. So I like that you brought in the front part of that funnel conversation because it's not in recruiting, you don't talk to 12 people and you send them all through. It's this kind of concept of you outreach, you network, you talk to 100 people and you kind of narrow the list down to 20 that are appropriate. You send the 20 over and then the hiring team or the hiring manager chooses the 12 that they want to talk to. So it's already kind of a chopped funnel by that point. And so I don't have a fix. It's so much like a suggestion where can we, using that calibration process before interviewing, really dial that in? I mean, what have you seen in some of the searches that you do?
yeah. And I do think the more and more it's interesting like how I reflect on some of the work I did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I'm like looking at just if someone reaches out to you and I'm like, I know where I sent you on an interview, and I'm like, why would I even send you on that interview? And it's just interesting how much more perspective you have, the more reps you have, the more times you fill roles, the more feedback you've gotten, and it just all helps. And I think um I truly value feedback quality.
Mm,
And, there's, of course, like the briefing, the kickoff has to be very detailed. But then I think the real secret is in the feedback. And it's equally important to have good feedback and not so great feedback. I think sometimes people only value the negative feedback and saying, "Oh, here's
mm,
why they're not a fit. Let me explain that to you so you can better screen." But equally important is here's why I love this person. And it's like you go from at least for me, I go from looking for this and having this like logical opinion of, oh, okay, they work here, they do this, I think they're really great, to really like feeling this ownership of listening deeply and just being like, you know what, I think this could be the person, because
mm,
like I'm really in the hiring manager's shoes because I've gotten so much feedback on so many candidates and I feel like the data points are all there, and then having that ability to go to the hiring manager and the internal recruiter and say, you know what, I like this person, but I don't know if they're the hire.
mm,
Like they're worth the meeting, but I don't know if they're the hire. Here's why. What do you think? Do you want to meet them? You can, and let's see if we're aligned. And I've done that. And then we are aligned. You know what? They're great. They fit the role, but they're not the hire. And here's why. And that's like from all the feedback we've gotten versus they
mm,
fit the job. And I think in the past, if someone fit the job, I would really advocate hard for them to get an interview. And now it's like, they fit the job, but are they the hire? And let's talk about that. And so now
mm,
on my update reports, I actually share those folks too, rather than either shielding the client from them and making the call
Uh-huh.
or just pushing them through and saying, yeah, they're great, let's go. And I'm like, I really like these people, but I'm not sure. And let's talk about it
Right.
and let's decide together. And I think that helps with those ratios.
I think you're absolutely right. And, old recruiting Zen, we're talking, 10 years ago was really dogmatic about these metrics, right? Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
we've got to hit 12, even no matter what, right? If we can demonstrate that we've hit our 12 in recruiting, then we did our part. Something else is broken. It's over there, right? It's not us. And now kind of thinking back at those times, there was a lot more nuance to what that those 12 might be. And there is an element of calibration. There's an element of calibration for the hiring team. Maybe it's a newly formed team. They've never hired
Mm-hmm.
anybody before. So your suggestion of like instead of thinking them as submissions, not submissions, but rather feedback and data points may be way more insightful than here, talk to 12 people, talk to 12 people,
Right.
talk to 12 people. Especially when it comes to executive type of roles, right? There aren't going to be rote, a stenciled job description and a stenciled candidate profile and a fill. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Mm-hmm. I love
Yeah.
it. So what's the main takeaway? What do you think?
I think the main takeaway is that metrics are really, really helpful if we know what we're tracking and what we're trying to track towards. Other than the actual hire itself, it actually points to where there might be some smoke happening within the process for you to dig into, but dogmatically sticking to metrics may actually be at your detriment.
I love it. All right. Well, until next time, thanks for the conversation.